cold wind sweeps across the test fields of Peenemünde. The Baltic Sea is dark and still, except for a low, thunderous hum, the kind of sound that makes the earth tremble before you even hear it. In the distance, a rocket stands ready, tall, silent, waiting. The V2, Hitler's Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapon that would change the war. But somewhere behind the walls of that laboratory, behind the gleam of steel and equations, someone is quietly trying to make it fail. Berlin, 1943. The city burns under nightly raids. The air smells of smoke and despair. Every night thousands die. Every morning the radio says, Germany will rise again. And in Peenemünde, far from the ruins, a team of engineers works under blinding lights, building the weapon meant to bring the Allies to their knees. They call themselves scientists, but every calculation now has blood on it. The man in the center of it all is Wernher von Braun, brilliant, ambitious, only 31 years old. He dreams of space, of rockets that could reach the stars, but the Reich demands rockets that fall on London. His team, young physicists, engineers, dreamers, now find themselves prisoners of their own creation. Each test that succeeds means thousands will die. Each failure means a reprieve, but also the risk of execution. And so begins one of the strangest, quietest rebellions in the history of war. A handful of German scientists, inside Hitler's most secret program, trying, in silence, to sabotage it. They could not speak. They could not meet. Their rebellion was made of silence, a misplaced screw, a wrong calculation, a delay reported as technical complication. In the records, it looks like inefficiency. In truth, it was resistance. At night, when the guards have gone and the machines fall silent, they stand by the window, looking out to sea. They see the reflection of the moon on the Baltic water, and they wonder, what is left of their humanity when their genius builds death? Some of them write in secret journals. Some burn their notes after every shift. Others simply stare at their hands that once built models for the stars, now drenched in the shadow of war. There is no gunfire here, no trenches, no blood in the mud. But the battlefield is just as real. It's inside the mind. Every equation, every wire, every rivet, a choice between conscience and survival. The camera moves through the Peenemünde complex, rows of drafting tables, chalk dust in the air, the smell of oil and graphite. Engineers hunched over blueprints, tracing lines they no longer believe in. On the wall, a portrait of the Führer watches them all. In another room, an SS officer checks progress reports. Failure is treason. Doubt is death. And yet, somewhere between the rows of figures, someone quietly erases a decimal, knowing that one tiny error might save a city. You can almost hear the ticking of the clock, each second a heartbeat in the vast machine of war. They are building something monstrous. They know it. And still they build, because to stop would mean the end of everything. But some have chosen a different path, not of open rebellion, but of quiet defiance. Not to destroy from without, but to corrode from within. We wanted to reach the moon, one of them would later whisper, but we ended up hitting London. The V2 would become the world's first ballistic missile, a technological triumph and a moral catastrophe. Behind every launch stood men torn in two, between their dream of flight and the horror of where it led. This story is not about the victors. It is about those who stood in the shadows of victory and dared to ask, what if we are wrong? It is the story of the German scientists who tried to slow down the very weapon they were ordered to perfect, who risked everything not to win the war, but to keep a fragment of their humanity alive within it. The screen fades to black. A single rocket ignites. The roar swallows the silence. And above it, the narrator's voice returns, calm, unflinching. In every war, there are men who build the future, and others who try, quietly, to stop it. Fade to the next chapter. The machinery of faith and fear. By 1943, Europe was a machine that devoured itself. Cities had turned into ruins. Men had turned into numbers. And somewhere in that vast machinery, Hidden behind propaganda posters and factory smoke were the mines that made it all possible. Germany's war industry stretched like veins across the continent. Steel from the Ruhr, oil from Romania, slave labor from every occupied land. Peenemünde, the coastal base on the Baltic Sea, was its most secret heart. Here, science was no longer about discovery. It was about destruction. They called them Vergeltungswaffen, weapons of vengeance. The V-1, a flying bomb that screamed through the sky, and the V-2, the world's first rocket to break the edge of space before plunging down at supersonic speed. For the Reich, these were not just weapons. They were promises. Promises that Germany still had power. Promises that London would burn, that fear would return to British hearts. In propaganda films, the announcers spoke with pride. The Führer's new weapon will strike from the heavens. But behind those triumphant reels were thousands of prisoners, Poles, Dutch, French, and Russians, forced to dig, weld, and die beneath the frozen ground. More people would die building the V-2 than from its explosions. Inside Peenemünde, science had become religion. Every test launch was a sermon. Every successful flight, a revelation. The engineers believed they were standing at the dawn of a new age, the space age. To them, this was not just war. It was a bridge to the stars. They spoke of Newton, of Goddard, of destiny. But around them, the Reich's shadow grew darker. The SS arrived, first to supervise, then to control. They brought silence and fear. Under the new order, failure was not an option. Rumors spread of interrogations, of disappearances, of colleagues who vanished after a miscalculation. The laboratory became a battlefield of numbers, where one wrong figure could mean death. Werner von Braun, the young visionary, was both admired and watched. He spoke the language of the stars but worked for men who worshipped conquest. To the generals, he was a genius. To the SS, he was a tool. To himself, he was no longer sure. His notebooks were filled with sketches of moonlanders, interplanetary ships, dreams that now had to serve the Reich's ambitions. He once told a colleague quietly, "Our purpose was to explore space, but now our rockets are aimed at people." And yet he kept working, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of hope that one day when the war was over, these same rockets would carry humanity beyond Earth. That hope became his shield, but for others, it became their curse. Among his team were men like Dr. Walter Thiel, a propulsion expert whose wife begged him to leave the project. Thiel saw what was coming. He wrote in his diary that the program had become a curse on our souls. He slowed production when he could, reported shortages that didn't exist, sent wrong mixtures of fuel. Each act was a whisper of rebellion, but in a place like Peenemünde, whispers could kill. The SS kept watch on every corridor. They counted every bolt, every test failure. A single unexplained delay could mean interrogation. And yet the sabotage continued, invisible, careful, desperate. Because every delay meant fewer rockets fired at civilians, fewer children dying in the night. By the summer of 1943, British intelligence began to suspect something. Aerial reconnaissance captured strange images along the Baltic coast. Long structures, massive hangars, circular launch pads. No one knew exactly what they were, but the Allies called it simply the rocket site. On the night of August 17, 1943, the Royal Air Force launched Operation Hydra, a bombing raid on Peenemünde. Hundreds of bombers crossed the sea. Searchlights pierced the sky. For a few hours, the secret heart of Germany's weapon program burned under a rain of fire. Many of the engineers survived. Many of the prisoners did not. And among the rubble, the survivors knew. The world now knew their secret. Peenemünde would rebuild. Faster, harder, under tighter control. The SS took full command. Prisoners from concentration camps were shipped to a new underground facility, Mittelwerk, where the rockets would now be produced in darkness, carved into the stone of the Harz Mountains. From that moment on, the scientists were no longer free men. They were part of the machine, whether they wanted it or not. Some chose to obey, some chose to escape, and some chose a third way, to resist from within, in silence. The narrator's voice lowers. History remembers the rockets that fell from the sky, but it forgets the trembling hands that built them. Some were believers, some were prisoners, and some were trying to save what little remained of their soul. He was not a soldier. He never carried a rifle. But his work killed more people than he could bear to imagine. Dr. Walter Thiel, 35 years old, a chemist by training, an engineer by necessity. A quiet man with tired eyes and an unshakable precision. He was one of the few who could make the impossible happen, keeping liquid oxygen stable, fuel mixtures balanced, and the V-2's heart alive long enough to fly. They called him Der Motorenmensch, the engine man. Without him, the rocket was nothing but a shell. And yet, the man who gave Hitler his weapon of vengeance would also be one of the first to lose faith in it. His day began before dawn. He walked through the corridors of Peenemünde, with the smell of acid and oil thick in the air. Engines roared in the testing pits. Flames danced beneath the exhaust towers. Each launch rattled the windows, a thunder that seemed to echo from hell itself. On paper, Thiel was a loyal German scientist. But at home, he wrote letters to his wife, Lieselotte. Letters filled not with pride, but fear. In one of them, found years later, he confessed, "We are building death. I no longer know where science ends and madness begins." He watched as the SS began assigning prisoners to their workshops, thin, hollow-eyed men from the camps, forced to polish the same steel that would end more lives. They were told not to speak. But sometimes, at night, Thiel left food near their benches. He could not save them. He could only remember their faces. The deeper the program advanced, the more Thiel resisted. He slowed reports. He questioned orders. He hid behind technical jargon. Combustion instability, mixture ratio anomalies, oxidizer inconsistency. Words that sounded scientific enough to mask deliberate delay. Each hesitation bought a few more days. Perhaps for London, perhaps for his conscience. But in Peenemünde, hesitation was dangerous. One day, an SS officer noticed the delays. He called Thiel into his office. The conversation was short, polite, deadly. "Doctor," the officer said, "you are one of the Reich's most valuable minds. Do not let doubt become your weakness." Thiel simply nodded. "I only seek perfection, Herr Oberst." He walked out alive, for now. Thiel's relationship with Werner von Braun was complicated, a blend of admiration, frustration, and quiet moral war. Von Braun dreamed of the stars. Thiel saw only the smoke rising from burned cities. They argued often, not loudly, but with precision. One spoke of possibility, the other of responsibility. Thiel once told him, standing beside the test field, "One day, Werner, these machines will touch the heavens, but before they do, they'll burn through everything human inside us." Von Braun said nothing. He just looked toward the horizon, where the next rocket would soon take flight. By early 1943, Thiel had reached a quiet decision. He could not stop the program, but he could slow it, subtly, invisibly. He began introducing minor design adjustments, slight imbalances in the fuel ratios, valve timing errors that would cause instability after ignition, small enough to look like engineering imperfections, large enough to cause test failures. When explosions occurred on the test stands, they called it experimental error. Only Thiel knew it was deliberate mercy. But sabotage in Peenemünde was not romantic. It was terror wrapped in silence. One mistake too obvious, and the SS would come for him. He began sleeping less. His wife noticed his trembling hands. He told her he was only tired, but she knew. In August 1943, British bombers approached Peenemünde. The night sky filled with light, the thunder of engines, the whistle of falling bombs. Thiel's house was among the first to be hit. He, his wife, and their 2 children died in an instant. The fire consumed everything: the papers, the letters, the calculations that never reached completion. When dawn came, only rubble remained. The official report called it collateral damage. But among those who worked with him, whispers spread that Thiel had known it was coming, that he chose to stay rather than flee. No one ever proved it. But the story lingered. A scientist who tried to resist in silence and met the same fate as those he pitied. After Thiel's death, the program accelerated. Von Braun took over his duties. Production moved underground. The rockets began to fall on London, the first man-made objects to break the edge of space, only to return as fire. But those who remembered Thiel never forgot the look in his eyes. A man who had touched the heart of technology and found it hollow. Years later, one of his colleagues said, "He was the only one among us who truly saw what we were doing, and it broke him." In the archives of Peenemünde, his name is listed on technical reports, fuel ratios, combustion studies. Nothing more. No medals, no monuments. Only a few letters, half-burned, that whisper from the past. We wanted to build something that would make man fly, but all we did was teach him how to fall. A slow shot of the Baltic shoreline, the sound of waves against concrete, a distant echo of engines fading into silence. Autumn, 1943. The fires of Peenemünde have barely cooled when the orders arrive. Transfer all rocket production underground. The Allied bombers have found the secret. The Reich demands invisibility. So, deep in the Harz Mountains, a new factory is born, Mittelwerk, the Central Works. It is carved into the earth like a wound. 2 long tunnels, each nearly 2 kilometers, where no sunlight will ever reach. Here, the air smells of stone dust, sweat, and death. The walls drip with moisture. The sound of machinery echoes like a heartbeat inside a grave. This is where the Wunderwaffe will be reborn, where thousands will die building the weapon that promised salvation and delivered horror. Trucks arrive by night, from Buchenwald, from Dachau, from camps across the continent. Men in striped uniforms stumble out, engineers, carpenters, tailors, teachers, now forced laborers in Hitler's secret factory. The guards shout numbers. The prisoners move. No one speaks. They are told what they will build. They are told what happens if they fail. And soon they learn that Mittelwerk is not a factory. It is a tomb that breathes. Every day the prisoners drag steel beams through the tunnels, fit engines, polish warheads. They sleep on the damp stone floor. They eat moldy bread, drink foul water. They die in hundreds from exhaustion, disease, collapse. When one falls, another takes his place. No names, only numbers. The scientists from Peenemünde are brought down next. Von Braun, his team, the engineers who once dreamed of space. They walk into the tunnels and see what their work has become. Rows of prisoners, skins stretched over bone, working beside their blueprints. The hum of engines mixed with the cries of men. Von Braun stares at the walls. There is no sky here, no stars, only darkness and the sound of drilling. For the first time, he understands the true cost of his dream. But the SS officers walk beside him, their eyes cold, their pistols always visible. The message is clear: keep the rockets flying, or you'll join them. From that moment on, many of the engineers split in two: the official face that obeys and the hidden conscience that resists. They are no longer scientists. They are prisoners of their own invention. Sabotage becomes a language spoken only in silence. A bolt left loose, a cable swapped, a fuse that fails under pressure. Each act must be invisible. Each mistake must look accidental. For the guards have eyes everywhere. Among the prisoners, secret networks form. Electricians, machinists, even former engineers from occupied France and Belgium. They share quiet nods, fragments of code. They risk everything for one small victory: a rocket that explodes on the test stand instead of over London. The SS suspects it. They start conducting random checks. Executions follow. Every failure is punished by death. But the sabotage continues, because even a doomed man wants to believe he can still choose how he dies. Outside the tunnels, in the forests near Nordhausen, the rockets are assembled and fired. A launch stand rises like a scar in the hills. Engines roar. Flames burst from the nozzles. The ground shakes. Smoke coils into the sky. Each successful launch is reported to Berlin. Each failure investigated with fear. But the truth behind many technical failures lies buried in the mountain, in the trembling hands that made them. Von Braun, now under SS supervision, records data after every test. He writes, "Combustion irregularity observed at 63 seconds. Cause unknown." But sometimes, deep down, he knows the cause. And he says nothing. At the top of the chain stands Hans Kammler, the SS general in charge of secret weapons. To him, Mittelwerk is not a place of suffering. It is efficiency. He visits the tunnels in polished boots, nods at the engineers, and demands more output. Each day, his reports to Himmler promise increased productivity, improved precision, unbreakable loyalty. No one dares mention the corpses lining the tunnel walls. They are simply removed before inspection. The war is turning. The Allies advance on every front. Germany is running out of fuel, food, and hope. But still, the rockets rise, the final illusion of power. Within the scientific team, a pact forms, not written, not spoken, just understood. If the Reich collapses, they will surrender to the Americans, not the Russians, not the SS. They begin hiding documents, blueprints, formulas, prototypes, in barrels buried near Nordhausen, a secret within a secret. Among them are a few who still carry Thiel's memory, his quiet defiance, his belief that science without conscience is damnation. They know they cannot stop the rockets now, but perhaps one day they can change what they mean. Late 1944, the V-2s begin to launch in waves, from the Dutch coast, from silos hidden in forests. Each one rises faster than sound, leaving only a trail of smoke behind. Civilians in London hear no warning, only an explosion, sudden, merciless. Thousands die. Each rocket carries the names of men who built it with broken hands. Back in the tunnels, the prisoners hear of success. They know what that word means. They do not cheer. They only work faster, hoping the next one fails. By spring 1945, more than 20,000 prisoners have died in Mittelwerk, more than the number killed by the V-2s themselves. History will remember the rockets, but not the men who died assembling them, not the engineers who delayed them, not the quiet hands that chose to save rather than destroy. When the Allies finally approach, Kammler orders the tunnels destroyed. But there is no time. The war is ending. The machine of death is collapsing on itself. Inside the tunnels, the lights flicker and die. The last engines stop. The prisoners sit in the dark, too weak to stand. They can still hear distant artillery, the sound of the world coming back. In that silence, one thought lingers among those who survive. They built the most advanced weapon in human history, and all it brought was ruin. Above ground, von Braun stands beside the wreckage of a rocket and whispers, "It worked perfectly." And that is what terrifies me. The echo of machinery fades. The air is still. Spring, 1945. The gates of Mittelwerk stand open at last. The Americans arrive first, helmets glinting, rifles raised, unaware of what waits inside the mountain. The tunnels are silent. The machines are still. Only the smell remains: oil, blood, decay. When the soldiers switch on their flashlights, the beams cut through the darkness, revealing rows of bodies, stacked like cargo. The walls are stained black. Wooden bunks sag under the weight of death. Everywhere the signs of what was built here. Half-finished rockets, crates of parts, blueprints marked Geheim, top secret. The men who find this place do not speak. Some turn away. Some vomit. Because no word, not factory, not labor camp, not even hell, fits what Mittelwerk truly was. Among the rubble, a few still breathe. Starved men with hollow eyes and hands that still tremble as if holding tools. One of them, a French engineer named Marcel, whispers to an American soldier. They said we were building a bridge to the stars. Then he laughs, dry, broken laughter that echoes off the tunnel walls. But it only reached the grave. Another, a Polish mechanic, points to a rocket still standing upright, its nose silver and sharp. We built it from our bones, he says. Every bolt has a name. The Americans nod, not knowing how to answer. They record the scene with their cameras. They collect the documents, and they write in their reports, Mittelwerk, subterranean rocket production site, evidence of atrocities. But for the survivors, there are no reports, only memories that will never fade. Not far from there, Werner von Braun and his closest engineers gather in a mountain lodge. The war is lost. The Reich is burning. They know the Russians are days away. Von Braun looks at his men, once dreamers, now fugitives. He says quietly, "Gentlemen, we have a choice. We surrender to Moscow or to Washington." He knows what the Soviets will do. He knows that in America, there might still be a future. So, that night, he makes his move. They load trucks with documents, design sketches, test logs, fuel calculations. He hides them in barrels, marked as farm equipment. Then, under a white flag, he drives toward the American lines. When he finally meets a U.S. officer, he introduces himself not as a Nazi engineer, but as a scientist in pursuit of spaceflight. And thus begins the quiet transaction history will later call Operation Paperclip, a trade between morality and progress, between the dead and the dream of the stars. Months later in America, von Braun's team is given new laboratories, new tools, and a new identity. The same hands that built V-2s for Hitler now build rockets for NASA's ancestors. The same minds that fueled war now speak of exploration. They are told to forget Mittelwerk, to forget the prisoners, to forget the mountain of ghosts that lies beneath their success. But some cannot. Late at night, von Braun walks through the test stands in Texas, watching the flames rise from new engines, engines that sound too much like the old ones, the same roar, the same brilliance, the same question burning in his mind. Does it matter who dreams, if the dream itself is pure? He never answers it. History will answer for him. Among von Braun's team, one quiet man remains haunted, Helmut Grotrup, Thiel's former assistant. He remembers the letters, the fear, the moral fracture that consumed his mentor. Now, as he watches new rockets rise under American banners, he feels the same sickness Thiel once described. One day, in his notebook, he writes, "We have traded uniforms, not consciences. The flame burns cleaner, but the fire is the same." Years later, he will refuse to go to the U.S., instead working for the Soviets, then for no one. He becomes a ghost of his own making, a man who built the future and then chose exile from it. But history does not belong to engineers. It belongs to those who could not write it. The prisoners of Mittelwerk are buried in mass graves in the forest outside Nordhausen. Their names are lost. Their families never told where they died. No monuments are built for them until decades later. A single stone inscribed, "For those who died making the weapons of tyranny." In the archives of London and Washington, the files remain stamped, classified for nearly 30 years. The world celebrates the moon landing before it remembers the tunnels beneath the mountain. A television broadcast shows the surface of the moon. A white boot presses into gray dust. A voice says, "That's one small step for man." The world cheers. Von Braun watches from his office in Houston, smiling faintly. But for a brief second, his eyes darken. Because he knows that the road to the moon began in a tunnel where men worked until they died. And though no one will ever ask him on camera, he sometimes imagines Thiel beside him, the man who warned him that the heavens will burn through what's human inside us. And he wonders if Thiel was right. In the decades that follow, the truth surfaces. Documents are declassified. Survivors tell their stories. Historians begin to ask the questions everyone once avoided. Can genius be separated from guilt? Can progress erase the suffering that built it? Can a dream born in darkness still reach the light? The answers are not simple, because the V2 was not just a weapon, it was a mirror, reflecting the best and worst of what humans can create. The same mind that looks to the stars can also dig its own grave. The same hand that draws a rocket can also sign a death order. The same flame that powers a spacecraft can burn a city to ash. Today, satellites orbit the Earth, Mars rovers wander across alien deserts, and rockets carry men and women beyond the sky. They are sleek, white, and silent, distant cousins of the V2. Their fuel burns cleaner, their purpose nobler. But the echo of that first flame, the one born in the tunnels, still lingers. Every time a rocket launches, a whisper remains beneath the roar. A reminder that science, like fire, can warm or destroy, depending on the heart that wields it. The camera returns to the forest above the tunnels. It is quiet now. Grass grows over the graves. The wind hums through the trees. No machinery, no orders, only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of the sea. The same Baltic waves that once carried Thiel's last breath. Over the screen, the final words appear. They dreamed of reaching the stars, and in doing so, they taught the world how easily we can fall. The war ends. The ruins of Europe smolder beneath a pale sky. Berlin is ash, Peenemünde is rubble, and deep beneath the Harz Mountains, the tunnels of Mittelwerk lie abandoned, silent, flooded, forgotten. For a time, the world pretends it never happened. The victors are busy dividing the spoils, the scientists, the blueprints. Truth becomes another kind of weapon, one to be kept or buried, depending on which side of the Iron Curtain you stand. The Cold War is dawning, and the rocket, that terrible child of war, is reborn. The year is 1946. On opposite sides of the world, two programs begin to rise. In America, Wernher von Braun walks through a desert testing ground in New Mexico, his shoes sinking into the sand. The V2s are here too, hundreds of them, shipped across the Atlantic, reassembled by his team under military supervision. They bear no swastikas now, only white stars and stripes. The Americans call it Project Hermes, a sanitized name for the same dream. The same engines roar again, this time aimed not at London, but the edge of space. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in the Soviet Union, Sergei Korolev, once imprisoned in Stalin's gulag, stands in a snowy field near Moscow. He too studies the fragments of captured V2s. He too builds from their bones. Neither man ever meets the other. Yet they are bound, twin heirs to the same machine, racing to see who can make it touch the heavens first. Back in Washington, the files are rewritten. Peenemünde becomes Fort Bliss. The V2 becomes the prototype for space research. The Nazi insignia vanish from the documents, the biographies polished. The words slave labor, mass graves, Mittelwerk, all omitted. Von Braun gives lectures on rocketry at American universities. He smiles for the cameras. He speaks of mankind's destiny beyond the Earth. No one asks what it cost to build his engines. In the press, he is called the man who will take us to the stars. The world wants to believe it, because it is easier to love the dream than to face the price of its birth. The rocket becomes the new sword of civilization. It carries not fire to London, but nuclear warheads to Moscow, New York, anywhere on Earth. The same technology that once promised progress now becomes the heartbeat of terror. Children learn to hide under school desks. Air raid sirens echo in cities that once believed they were safe. And still, the rockets rise, faster, taller, deadlier. The world holds its breath, balanced between science and annihilation. And then, one day, the same engines that haunted the 1940s carry a satellite into orbit. Sputnik, a metallic sphere beeping across the sky, proof that humanity can finally reach beyond Earth. But beneath the applause lies a whisper of the past, the sound of those first engines, born in darkness. In the 1960s, von Braun becomes a household name. He appears on television beside Disney animators, explaining the future of spaceflight to smiling American families. He draws sleek rockets on blackboards, promising moon bases, Mars colonies, the dawn of a new age. He has become the face of human aspiration, clean, charming, visionary. The past has been washed away by the brightness of the stars. And yet late at night, he sometimes dreams of the tunnels, of the prisoners who built his first rockets with bleeding hands. He never speaks of them publicly, but those who worked close to him say that when the engines ignited, his face would always turn pale, as if hearing voices no one else could. When asked once about his time in the Reich, he replied, "My moral obligation was to my dream of spaceflight." A pause, a smile. Politics was not my concern. But history has a long memory, and conscience even longer. Across the Iron Curtain, Sergei Korolev works in secrecy. He builds rockets not to conquer cities, but to prove that the Soviet Union can reach farther, faster. Unlike von Braun, his name is hidden for decades, classified even within his own country. He dies before the world knows who he was. When the Americans land on the moon in 1969, his engineers watch the broadcast in silence. They mourn him not because he lost the race, but because he never lived to see that humanity, both East and West, had finally left the Earth behind. He once told his team, "The rocket does not care about flags. It only asks where you point it." A truth both sides tried to forget. Years later, in the 1980s, a group of German historians visit the ruins of Peenemünde. The test stands are overgrown with weeds, the control bunkers filled with moss. The sea wind howls through the broken windows of the assembly halls. They find fragments, rusted bolts, shattered ceramic tiles, burned fragments of calculation sheets. Among them, a plaque still clings to a wall, "For the Führer's victory." But beneath it, someone, long ago, has scratched 3 words with a nail: "Never again here." The historians stand in silence, because even decades later the place feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by the unbearable nearness of genius and horror. By the 1990s, the survivors of Mittelbau, the camp attached to Mittelwerk, begin to speak publicly. Their testimonies fill courtrooms and documentaries. They describe the tunnels, the hunger, the sound of engines roaring above their heads as friends collapsed beside them. One survivor says, "We built the first step to the moon, and no one remembers our names." Another adds, "We were told we were working for the future, but the future did not come for us." Eventually, a memorial is erected, a museum carved into the same mountain that once held the factory. Visitors walk through dim corridors, past the remains of machinery, past black and white photos of the dead. On the wall, one inscription stands out: "Science without conscience is the ruin of the soul." And beneath it, a small plaque reads, "In memory of Dr. Walter Thiel, engineer, dissenter, dreamer." Today, every space agency, NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, SpaceX, stands on the shoulders of that legacy. Their engines burn hydrogen instead of alcohol. Their missions carry telescopes, satellites, explorers. But their lineage traces back to the same equation, the same physics, the same flame that once destroyed cities. This is the paradox of progress. Every leap forward leaves a shadow behind. The rocket, the computer, the atom, all born from the same fire, all capable of creation or ruin. And perhaps that is the lesson of Peenemünde and Mittelwerk, that humanity's reach must always be guided by something more than curiosity, more than ambition. It must be guided by conscience. A quiet shot of the night sky. A single rocket launches. Slow, silent, graceful. Its trail glows white against the stars. The narrator's voice returns. They called it the weapon of vengeance, but in truth it was a mirror, reflecting who we were and who we still are. Every rocket since has carried both dreams and ghosts, and as long as humanity looks upward, we must remember the cost of what we left beneath the earth. The music swells. Low strings, a haunting choir. Cut to the ocean. Waves crash gently against the Baltic shore. The camera lingers. On the screen, the final words fade in. From the ashes of war rose the dream of the stars. May we never forget which came first. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The guns fall silent, but silence does not mean peace. Across the country, cities lie in ruins. Factories turn to skeletons, rail lines twisted like melted wires. The Reich that once promised 1,000 years has lasted barely 12. In Peenemünde, the final documents burn. Blueprints, test results, lists of personnel, all swallowed by fire before the Allies arrive. The men who built Hitler's rockets scatter, some captured by the Americans, others by the Soviets. A few simply vanish. For years they have lived in the shadow of the rockets they created. Now they must live in the shadow of their conscience. The V-2 had been hailed as a miracle weapon, faster than sound, impossible to stop. But it had changed nothing. It killed thousands, but it did not win the war. It proved that technology without morality is just another kind of barbarism. In the quiet aftermath, Allied investigators arrive at the underground factory at Mittelwerk. The air is thick with rot and oil. The tunnels reek of death. And in that damp darkness, they find the true cost of Hitler's wonder weapon. Over 20,000 forced laborers, men, women, children, have died here building the rockets. Hanged for sabotage, beaten for exhaustion, buried in the same ground that swallowed their machines. A British officer writes in his report, "It is not an industrial site, it is a grave." By summer, the Allied bombing has reduced Peenemünde to rubble. The launch towers are twisted metal. The test stands broken open like cracked bones. For years, seagulls nest in the shattered hangars where engineers once drew blueprints for the future. On the walls, faint chalk markings still remain. Calculations, angles, thrust ratios, equations written by men who dreamed of reaching the stars. Now those numbers are ghosts. Nothing moves but the wind and the gulls. In the distance, the Baltic glimmers, a cold, endless mirror. It reflects not the rockets, but the sky they never truly reached. Autumn 1945, the Americans begin Operation Paperclip, a secret program to recruit German scientists. The war may be over, but a new race has begun, a race for the future. Von Braun and his team are transported to the United States. Their pasts are scrubbed clean, their files rewritten. They become technical experts rather than members of the Nazi regime. When they step onto American soil, they are met not with handcuffs, but handshakes. They will build new rockets now, for a new cause, under a new flag. But history cannot be erased that easily. Each test launch in the New Mexico desert carries the same echo, the same roar that once rose from the Baltic coast, a sound that never really stopped. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of Germany, the survivors of the Dora Mittelbau labor camp return to the tunnels. They walk through the same darkness where they once toiled. Their footsteps echo against the walls, hollow and cold. They find no recognition, no medals, no graves for their comrades. For decades, their story remains buried beneath the triumphs of the space age. The world prefers to remember the rockets that reached the moon, not the hands that built them underground. One survivor later writes, "They looked to the stars. We looked at the dirt. Both of us, prisoners of the same dream." By the 1950s, the Cold War transforms the rocket into the new symbol of human power. Von Braun's designs help launch satellites, then astronauts. His name becomes synonymous with exploration, not destruction. But for those who remember Peenemünde, the celebration rings hollow, because the line between invention and guilt is thin, thinner than the shell of a rocket. The question remains, can a dream be pure if it is born in blood? Can humanity reach the stars without bringing its ghosts along? The ruins of Peenemünde still stand today. Grass grows over the craters. Wind rattles through the empty hangars. Every year, a few historians, veterans, and descendants come to place flowers where the first V-2 was launched. Not to honor it, but to remember what it meant. A warning, carved in rust and silence. Because history is not just written in victories, but in the cost of each step forward. The rockets change the world, but the world still carries their weight. The camera pans slowly across the Baltic horizon at dusk. Waves crash gently against the shore. The last light fades behind the ruined towers of Peenemünde. A quiet voice, calm, reflective, closes the chapter. War ends. But the engines of ambition do not. They only change direction. And somewhere between the stars and the ashes, humanity must decide what it truly wants to build. Night. The screen is black, except for the faint hum of wind over the Baltic. Then, a single flicker of light. A rocket streaks upward, disappearing into the heavens. But this time it carries no bombs, no vengeance, only a satellite circling above the Earth like a silent witness. Below, the ruins of Peenemünde glimmer faintly under the moon. The war is long over, but its echo has not faded. History moves forward. Towers are rebuilt. New wars begin, and old ones are forgotten. But in the soil of northern Germany, the past still breathes. Under the wild grass lie fragments of steel, gears corroded by salt, a half-melted insignia. Once, they were part of the most advanced weapon of their time. Now they are fossils of a civilization that confused progress with salvation. Every generation builds its own rockets, in laboratories, in boardrooms, in politics, always reaching higher, always faster. But the question remains, whispering from the ruins. Where are we trying to go, and what are we willing to forget to get there? Among the records that survived, investigators later found traces of strange inconsistencies, test failures that made no sense, calculations that accidentally slowed production, shipments delayed by weather, small acts, tiny fractures in the perfect machine. Perhaps they were only errors, or perhaps they were something more. Because even in the heart of darkness, there are always those who refuse to let the flame of conscience die. Scientists who stalled for time, who misplaced components, who dared to hope that their small defiance might save someone, somewhere, from the fire. Their names are mostly lost. But their silence spoke louder than any speech. They remind us that resistance is not always loud. Sometimes it's just the refusal to let your soul be used for destruction. The story of the V2 rocket is not just the story of technology. It is the story of a choice, between ambition and morality, between creation and complicity, between the dream of touching the stars and the nightmare of burning the earth. Science is not evil, but it is never neutral. It reflects the hands that guide it, and the hearts that justify it. Wernher von Braun once said he wanted to explore space, and he did. But the path to the moon was paved through tunnels where thousands died. That is the paradox that history cannot wash away, that sometimes humanity's brightest light casts the darkest shadow. Today, children learn about rockets, satellites, and the dream of Mars. They see photographs of astronauts standing on alien soil. They rarely hear about Peenemünde or Mittelwerk. But the line connects them, thin, fragile, and unbroken. Every launch, every countdown, carries the same echo of that first ignition in 1942. A reminder that progress and conscience must rise together, or not at all. The camera drifts upward, from the ruins, through the clouds, into the night sky. Earth turns slowly below. Silent. Beautiful. The narrator's voice, calm, almost whispering. The stars have always called to us, but the way we reach them defines who we are. A pause. Then softly, may we never again build dreams on the backs of the forgotten. May the engines of progress remember the cost of their first roar. The music fades into stillness. A long, haunting note. The final image. The curve of the earth, pale blue against the void. And beneath it, one final line appears on the screen. Every generation must decide whether its science serves humanity or replaces it.